What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Ricky and Nikki Accounting YouTube channel, the channel where we speak about all things financial literacy. And today we're going to be talking about taxes, and more in particular, how to pay yourself correctly as an S corporation owner. Because you hear a lot about S corps, how it helps you save on taxes. I get questions all the time about S corporations owners. So today we're going to talk about how to exactly pay yourself, mistakes to avoid. So if you're somebody who wants to learn how to pay yourself correctly as an S corporation owner, and maybe you're an LLC owner currently and you're thinking about making the switch over to an S corp, this is information you're going to need to know. So stay to the end so you can get a full breakdown on how this works. Now, the two main entities you hear the most about is LLCs and S corporations. Now, what is the key difference? The key difference is, because you hear about, is the tax saving. How do you save on taxes with an S corp? When you are a business owner, an LLC owner, you have to pay self-employment tax, which is 15.3% on your gross income. Everything you make, you have to pay that 15.3% on that. Now, as an S corporation owner, you don't pay that 15.3% on everything you make. You only pay that 15.3% on the salary that you give yourself. And the verbiage that the IRS actually uses is reasonable salary. Get used to that right there. Reasonable salary normally is about 30% of what you make. So if you made $100,000, you pay yourself $30,000 through the S corp, and you only pay that 15.3% of self-employment tax on that 30K, not the 100K that you would have if you were an LLC owner. So that's where the big tax saving comes in, where everybody talks about that you will save so much more on taxes if you become an S corporation owner. And you normally want to make that switch once you're making around 50K a year in net profit. S corporation owners are required to pay yourself a reasonable salary. This is how you're going to be able to actually pay yourself correctly. LLC owners don't have to pay themselves a reasonable salary. Actually have the definition of what the IRS says what a reasonable salary is. A salary that is appropriate for what another person performing the same or a similar job in the same industry could expect to be compensated by an employer. And this is bright. I talked to you about the tax saving portions, but why is it that S corporation owners have to pay themselves a reasonable salary? And the reason for that is payroll taxes, which includes Social Security and Medicare. That gets included into it. And another key tip that a lot of people don't even realize, when you are an S corporation owner, you are technically not considered self-employed anymore. You are now looked at as an employee of that corporation, which is why you don't have to pay self-employment taxes anymore. Yes, I did say you paid that 15.3% on your reasonable salary, but it's not considered self-employment taxes anymore. Now that you are an employee of the corporation, that is payroll taxes. That's why you're paying the Social Security and Medicaid, just like you would at a regular W-2 employee job. Something else I need you to know is, just because you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary, that does not mean you have to fully pay yourself through a salary. You can take the distributions just like a regular LLC owner. So you can't pay yourself with distributions on top of your reasonable salary. But what the crazy hack about this is too, is you don't have to pay those payroll taxes on the distributions. You only would have to pay on the reasonable salary portion. You see how we're getting all the tax savings? This is why switching over to an S corp is a major tax strategy, because you can have a big chunk of your income not be hit with payroll taxes or self-employment taxes. And this is why a lot of business owners end up switching over into an S corp. You will have to work with a payroll processing company. So if you're not working with one yet, this is what you can do. You can go ahead and lock in with a payroll service like QuickBooks. I use QuickBooks. There's ADP, which is a big one. And there's also Gusto as well. So you can use any of those three to get your payroll done. Let's go over a quick example. Let's break some numbers down. So let's say you run a tire repair company. I actually have a client who does mobile tire repair. So let's say you made $150,000. Say you made $150,000. So you gave yourself a reasonable salary of $40,000, right? You have to pay that self-employment tax, that payroll tax on that $40,000. So this is where that payroll company, ADP, Gusto, or QuickBooks, you would have them run your payroll and they would pay you $40K through them. Now you're left with an additional $110,000. If you want to use the distribution method in order to not have to pay the payroll taxes or the self-employment taxes, this is where you'll be able to write yourself checks or just transfer the money from your business account into your personal account. Either way, both ways are very much acceptable. And you don't have to pay yourself all that money at once. You can pay yourself throughout the year, throughout every couple of weeks, every week, bi-weekly, every month, however you feel, just so you can, be able to handle the cost of living, your day-to-day operations, your day-to-day expenses to live. You can go ahead and pay yourself those distributions, whatever is more efficient for you. So with that example I just gave you, how much savings would you be making in taxes? So let's go over it. Now, like I said, if you made $150,000, if you were an LLC owner, you would have had to pay that 15.3% on the full 150,000. So let's see, 150,000 times a whopping 14.3%. You would have had to pay $22,950 in self-employment taxes, Social Security and Medicare. That's crazy. Now, like I said, if you were an S-Corporation owner, with this example, my client gave himself a reasonable salary of $40,000. So with that $40,000, right? Let's do $40,000, right? 15.3% on the $40,000. He only had to pay $6,120 in self-employment tax. So as an LLC owner, let's do the math right here. So just by switching over from an LLC to an S-Corp, you would have saved $16,830 in self-employment taxes. You see why switching over into an S-Corp is so beneficial for you? That is some serious tax savings, you guys. Now, it does sound sweet, it sounds amazing, obviously, or you're saving all that money in taxes. But you gotta ask yourself, do you owe any money on the distributions that you're giving yourself? Because even though you don't have to pay payroll taxes on the money that you took out as distributions, that money isn't completely tax-free. Let me explain. You will have to pay federal income tax and state income taxes if you live in a state where they do have state tax. So please do not make that mistake thinking that you're not going to pay any taxes on those distributions. So make sure you're keeping some money aside, so once tax season comes around, you will not have to worry about being slapped with a big old tax bill because you weren't prepared, because you heard the wrong information online. That is why you came to my channel, so you can get all the right information on how to pay yourself and learn everything that you need to know about being a business owner, an LLC owner, S-Corporation owner, and all things taxes, because it's very important for you to stay on top of your taxes and stay in compliance with the IRS. So I say again, you will have to pay taxes on those distributions. Tax evasion is a federal crime, so don't think you're gonna get away with that. So to avoid any jail time, make sure you are paying all the taxes on your salary income and all the taxes on your distribution income. When you hear about an S-Corporation, a lot of people make the mistake of paying themselves way too much. Other people pay themselves way too little. So how do you decide what is a reasonable salary? Because honestly, paying yourself too much or too little affects you negatively both ways. Because if you pay yourself too much, you're paying way too much in taxes. That's not necessary. The point of an S-Corp is to save on taxes. Now, on the other hand, if you pay yourself too little, then it's gonna look like you're not really giving yourself a reasonable salary. You're not really paying yourself too much, which can raise major red flags and can have the IRS want to audit your company. And in the case where the IRS did deem that you did not give yourself a reasonable salary because it was very, very low, they will hit you with penalties and interest fees, which you do not want, and I don't want that for you. But what's ironic about it is the IRS doesn't really give a clear guideline of what is a reasonable salary, or like the percentages. Go figure, right? And of course they wouldn't make it easy for you to figure it out. Another thing is the IRS can't really impose a minimum dollar amount for S-Corporation salaries. And that's really because income varies from business to business, and some businesses don't really make money, especially in the early stages. But they do list a number of different factors when choosing a reasonable wage. So here are some of the key factors when it comes to factoring in and determining what is a reasonable salary for you. Training and expenses, duties and responsibilities, time and effort, dividend history, payment to non-shareholder employees, timing of bonuses, comparable rates, and compensation agreements. These are the components that are taken into place when they want you to decide what is a reasonable salary. But what I always recommend is you speak with a tax professional before you decide on choosing what reasonable salary you want to give yourself. And that's just so you can confirm that you're not overpaying or underpaying. But that about wraps up the video today. What do you guys think about paying yourself as an S corporation owner? What do you think about the benefits of being an S corporation owner? And before I let you go, I want you guys to know that we have started a new private community here at Ricky and Nikki Accounting Services, where you'll learn about how to save on taxes, learn how to repair and build credit, learn about investing, learn about stocks, learn about different side hustles and plays where you can bring in extra side income. If you want to be a part of this community, the link is going to be in the description, so go check it out. There's already a lot of game in there, and more gems are dropped each and every single day. So you can make money just off of the information in that community. So go ahead and run up a bag in that community. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time.